She was tied to horses for being half native, until a Blackfoot hunter freed her, whispering, "Stay low, follow me." Copper Ridge, Montana Territory. Early autumn, 1879. The afternoon sun burned white and merciless over the timber town, casting sharp shadows across the rutted Main Street. Copper Ridge wasn't a place for mercy. It was a town built on extraction, where men tore copper from the earth and dignity from anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of civilized. The air always smelled of wood smoke, sweat, and something bitter that clung to the back of the throat like shame. Soraya Thornhill stood in the center of the town square, with her hands bound behind her back, wrists raw from the coarse hemp rope that had been tied too tight. She was 23 years old, slender but strong, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her father had been a Scottish trapper named William Thornhill. Her mother had been Blackfoot, a woman named Ayana who had died bringing Soraya into the world. Soraya had grown up between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. And Copper Ridge had never let her forget it, today. The town had decided she needed to be reminded of her place. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Merchants leaned against storefronts with arms crossed. Women clutched their children close, whispering behind gloved hands. Ranch hands and miners formed a loose circle, some grinning, others simply watching with the blank expressions of men who had seen cruelty before and would see it again. At the edge of the crowd, an old Blackfoot woman named Winter Dove stood silent, her face carved with grief, but she did not step forward. No one ever did. The man responsible for Soraya's humiliation was Clayton Mercer, the town's self-appointed moral authority and owner of the largest copper claim in the territory. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a thick gray beard and eyes like chips of flint. He stood beside two horses, both saddled and restless, their reins held loose in his meaty hands. Soraya had been tied between them, one rope fastened to each saddle horn, stretching her arms wide so she could barely keep her footing. "This woman," Mercer announced, his voice carrying across the square like a preacher at a revival, "has been accused of theft. She stole food from the company store. But that's not the real crime here, is it? The real crime is that she walks among us pretending to be something she's not. Her mother was a savage. Her blood is tainted. And we've been too soft, too forgiving, letting her live here like she's one of us." Soraya's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that words only made things worse. The truth was she hadn't stolen anything. A miner's child had been hungry, and she'd given the boy a piece of bread from her own meager rations. But Mercer had seen it, twisted it, and now here she stood, about to be made an example of. She had lived in Copper Ridge for 5 years, ever since her father died in a blizzard while checking his trap lines. The town had tolerated her presence because she worked hard, kept to herself, and didn't cause trouble. She cleaned floors at the boarding house, took in mending, and helped Winter Dove gather herbs in the foothills. But tolerance was not acceptance, and it never had been. Mercer turned to the crowd, his voice rising. "We're going to teach her what happens when you forget your place. When you think you can take what belongs to decent folk." He gestured to the horses. "These animals will remind her. They'll drag her through this square until she understands that half-breed blood doesn't belong in civilized society." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Soraya felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she kept her face blank. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She had watched her father face down grizzly bears with less fuss than most men gave to crossing the street. She had her mother's blood, the blood of people who had survived in this land for generations before the miners and their hunger for copper arrived. She would not break, not here, not for them. A young woman in the crowd, Margaret Sullivan, the schoolteacher's daughter, took a half-step forward as if to protest. Her face was pale, her hands clutched together. But her father, Reverend Sullivan, gripped her shoulder and pulled her back. "Don't interfere, Margaret," he said quietly. "This is town business." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she obeyed, and Saraya felt something inside her go cold and hard. Even the good people, the ones who sang hymns on Sunday about loving thy neighbor, would stand by and watch. Mercer raised his hand, preparing to slap the hindquarters of both horses simultaneously. The animals shifted, sensing the tension. Their ears flicked back, nostrils flaring. Saraya braced herself, knowing that once they bolted, the ropes would pull her arms in opposite directions. She might survive it, but she would be broken. Her shoulders would dislocate. Her wrists would tear, and even if she lived, she would never be whole again. Then from the edge of the square, a voice cut through the air like a blade through fog. "Touch those horses and you'll answer to me." Every head turned. The crowd parted slightly, and through the gap rode a man on a paint horse, its coat a patchwork of white and brown. The rider was tall, lean, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent more time in the wilderness than in towns. He wore buckskin trousers and a dark shirt, his long black hair tied back with a leather cord. His face was angular, weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes were the deep brown of rich earth. A beaded necklace hung at his throat, and a rifle rested across his saddle. He was Blackfoot, unmistakably so, and he carried himself with a dignity that made the townspeople instinctively step back. Cale Ravencrest had not been to Copper Ridge in over a year. He was a hunter and tracker, a man who preferred the company of mountains and rivers to the noise and cruelty of settlements. His people called him Lone Walker because he had chosen a solitary path after his family was killed in a raid when he was 16. He had learned to survive in the harshest conditions, to read the land like white men read books, and to trust his instincts above all else. Today, returning from a week-long hunt in the high country with 3 deer and a mountain lion pelt, he had ridden into town to trade for supplies, coffee, salt, ammunition. What he found instead was a scene that turned his blood cold. Mercer's face darkened. "This doesn't concern you, Indian. Ride on before you find yourself in the same position as her." Cale dismounted with deliberate slowness, his boots hitting the packed earth with a solid thud. He walked forward, his gaze never leaving Mercer's face. Every step was measured, controlled. He had learned long ago that white men respected strength and feared unpredictability. He would give them both. "It concerns me when I see a man about to commit murder in broad daylight. That's what this is. You pull those horses and she dies. She's a thief," Mercer spat. "And she's half savage, just like you. Maybe you should join her." Cale stopped a few paces away, close enough that Mercer could see the cold fury in his eyes. "I know who she is. Saraya Thornhill. Her father was William Thornhill, a trapper who traded fairly and never cheated anyone. I bought furs from him 3 winters running. Her mother was Ayana of the Siksika, a healer who saved more lives in this territory than you've ever known. When the fever came through the camps, she walked among the sick when everyone else ran. This woman has done nothing to deserve what you're about to do. She stole from the store," Mercer insisted, his voice rising to regain control of the crowd. "We have witnesses. We have laws here." "Laws," Cale repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "You mean the laws that let you steal land from my people? The laws that let you hang a man for being the wrong color? The laws that say a copper claim is worth more than a human life?" He stepped closer, and several men in the crowd shifted nervously. "I've seen your justice, Mercer. I've seen the bodies left behind when your laws are finished. It's built on graves and watered with blood." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some of the women pulled their children back. The men who had been grinning moments before now watched Cale with wary eyes. There was something about him, a stillness that suggested violence held in check, like a wolf that hadn't yet decided whether to strike. One of the miners, a man named Dutch Henderson, muttered, "Maybe we should just let her go." Ain't worth the trouble. But another man, one of Mercer's foremen, spat tobacco juice and said, "We let one go. They'll all think they can steal from us." Mercer's hand moved toward the pistol at his belt, but Cale was faster. In one smooth motion, he drew a long hunting knife from his belt and stepped between Mercer and Soraya. The blade caught the sunlight, throwing a brief flash across Mercer's face. "You want to draw that gun, go ahead. But know this, you'll be dead before it clears leather. And every man here will see that I gave you the chance to walk away." For a long moment, no one moved. The entire square seemed to hold its breath. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A shutter creaked in the wind. Then Cale turned his back on Mercer, a gesture of such profound disrespect that several people gasped. In Blackfoot culture, turning your back on an enemy was either supreme confidence or a death wish. Cale made it clear which one he intended. He walked to Soraya, his knife already slicing through the rope that bound her left wrist to the first horse. The rope parted with a snap and Soraya sagged, her arm dropping to her side as blood rushed back into her numb fingers. Pain shot through her shoulder, sharp and bright, but she bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. Cale moved to the second rope, cutting it just as swiftly. Soraya stumbled, her legs barely holding her, and Cale caught her elbow, steadying her without looking at her face. His touch was firm but gentle, impersonal, yet somehow reassuring. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Yes," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the dust and fear. "Then stay low and follow me," he said, still not meeting her eyes. "Don't look back. Don't run. Just walk steady toward my horse. If they see you panic, they might try to stop us." Soraya nodded, her vision swimming slightly. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on the solid presence of Cale beside her. The crowd seemed to blur at the edges, faces becoming indistinct. She heard whispers, some sympathetic, most hostile. Someone said, "Good riddance." Another voice, a woman's, said, "Lord have mercy on her soul." Mercer recovered his composure, fury twisting his features. "You can't just take her. She's under town jurisdiction. I'll have the marshal arrest you both. I'll send riders to Helena. You won't make it 10 miles before you're brought back in chains." Cale finally turned to face him again, his expression cold and unyielding. "Your marshal is 3 days' ride away in Helena. By the time he gets here, we'll be long gone. And if you try to follow us, you'll find that the mountains are not kind to men like you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd like fresh snow. "I know every pass, every game trail, every place where a man can disappear and never be found. You send riders after us, they won't come back." He guided Soraya toward his horse, keeping himself between her and the crowd. The townspeople watched in silence, unsure how to respond. Some looked relieved that the spectacle was over, others angry that their entertainment had been stolen. But no one moved to stop them. Cale lifted Soraya onto the paint horse with surprising gentleness, his hands supporting her waist as she settled into the saddle. Then he swung up behind her, his arms bracketing her without crowding her, his body a wall of warmth at her back, as they turned to leave. Winter Dove stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. Her weathered face was wet with tears, but she nodded once to Cale, a gesture of gratitude and blessing. In her hands she held a small medicine bundle, and she lifted it briefly toward them. Cale inclined his head in return, acknowledging the gift and the prayer it represented, then urged his horse forward. They rode out of Copper Ridge at a measured pace, neither hurrying nor hesitating. Behind them, Mercer's voice rose in impotent rage, shouting orders that no one seemed eager to follow. "Get your horses. We ride after them in 5 minutes. I want every man armed and ready." But the miners and ranch hands looked at each other uncertainly. Going after a Blackfoot tracker in the mountains was a good way to end up dead, and they all knew it. The crowd began to disperse, the spectacle over, leaving only dust and unanswered questions in their wake. Once they cleared the edge of town, Cale spoke without turning his head. "There's a creek about 2 miles north. We'll stop there so you can drink and I can check your wrists. After that, we need to move fast. Mercer won't follow himself, but he'll find men who will. Money talks louder than common sense." Soraya nodded, though he couldn't see it. She was trembling now, the shock of what had almost happened finally catching up to her. Her hands shook where they gripped the pommel of the saddle, and her breath came in short, shallow gasps. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale was silent for a moment, guiding the horse along a narrow trail that led away from the main road and into the cover of pine trees. The air grew cooler under the canopy, and the sounds of the town faded behind them. "Because no one should be treated like that. Because your mother once helped my sister when she was sick with fever, and I never forgot. My sister was only 8 years old, burning up with sickness, and your mother walked 3 miles in a snowstorm to bring medicine. She saved her life." He paused, his voice rougher. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because I know what it's like to be caught between 2 worlds. Belonging to neither, trusted by none." They rode in silence after that, the town shrinking behind them until it was nothing but a smudge of smoke against the vast Montana sky. Soraya felt the tension slowly easing from her body, replaced by exhaustion and a deep, aching relief. Her wrists throbbed, her shoulders burned, and she knew she would have bruises that would last for weeks. But she was alive, and she was free, at least for now. The trail climbed steadily, winding through stands of lodgepole pine and aspen. Cale guided the horse with subtle shifts of his weight, barely touching the reins. He knew this country intimately, every ridge and valley, every place where water could be found. They passed a meadow where elk had grazed recently, the grass still bent and torn. Further on, they crossed a stream so clear Soraya could see the stones at the bottom. "Round and smooth as eggs, we're here," Cale said finally. Reining in beside a small creek that tumbled down from the high country. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Soraya down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, but he steadied her until she found her balance. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a flat rock near the water. "I'll get you something to drink." Soraya sank onto the rock, her whole body trembling with delayed shock. She watched as Cale knelt by the creek, filled his canteen, and brought it to her. His movements were efficient, practiced, the actions of a man who had spent years taking care of himself in the wilderness. She took the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply, the cold water shocking her throat, grounding her in the moment. Cale knelt in front of her and gently took her hands, examining her wrists. The rope had cut deep, leaving raw bleeding grooves in her skin. He made a low sound of anger, then reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small tin. "This is bear grease mixed with yarrow and sage. It'll hurt at first, but it'll keep the wounds from festering." He opened the tin and began applying the salve with careful, deliberate movements. His hands were large and calloused, but surprisingly gentle. Soraya hissed at the sting, but didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Cale replied. "We're not safe. Mercer will send men, and they'll bring dogs. We need to cover ground, and we need to do it fast." He finished wrapping her wrists in strips of clean cloth torn from his own shirt, then stood and offered her his hand. "Can you ride for a few more hours? I know a place where we can hole up for the night. It's well hidden, and there's shelter." Soraya took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "I can ride," she said, meeting his eyes for the first time. What she saw there surprised her. Not pity, not hunger, just a steady, calm determination. He looked at her like she was a person, not a problem to be solved or a body to be used. It was the first time in years anyone in Copper Ridge had looked at her that way. "Then let's move," Cale said. "The mountains are waiting, and they don't care about our troubles." But they'll keep us safe if we respect them. They mounted again, and Kale turned the horse northwest, toward the high country where the peaks scraped the sky and the air grew thin. Behind them, Copper Ridge was already forgotten, just another human stain on the vast, indifferent landscape. Ahead, the wilderness opened like a promise. Dangerous and beautiful, and utterly unforgiving. Soraya didn't know this man, didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in hours, she felt something other than fear. She felt the stirring of something she had thought long dead. Buried under years of scorn and rejection, she felt hope. The mountain trail narrowed as they climbed higher, the paint horse picking its way carefully over loose stones and exposed roots. The afternoon light had shifted, turning golden as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Soraya could feel Kale's steady presence behind her, his breathing calm, and even despite the exertion of the climb. She had stopped trembling, but exhaustion was settling into her bones like winter cold. After another hour of riding, Kale guided the horse off the main trail onto what looked like nothing more than a deer path, barely visible among the undergrowth. The vegetation grew thicker here, pines giving way to dense spruce and fir. Soraya caught glimpses of movement in the shadows, squirrels chattering warnings, a raven watching from a high branch. The wilderness was alive around them, observing their passage. "Almost there," Kale said quietly. "Another quarter mile. The place I'm taking you is a cave system that few people know about. I found it years ago while tracking a wounded elk. It's dry, defensible, and has a back entrance if we need it." Soraya nodded, her throat too dry to speak despite the water she'd drunk. Her wrists ached where the rope had bitten deep, and every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her shoulders. But she refused to complain. This man had risked his life for her. The least she could do was endure without whining. The cave entrance appeared suddenly, a dark opening in a cliff face partially hidden by a curtain of wild grapevines that had turned brilliant red with autumn. Kale dismounted first, then helped Soraya down. Her legs wobbled, and he kept his hand on her elbow until she steadied herself. "Wait here," he said, drawing his knife. "I need to make sure nothing else has claimed this place since I was last here." He disappeared into the darkness, moving with the silence of smoke. Soraya stood beside the horse, one hand resting on its warm neck, listening to the sounds of the forest. Birds called in the distance. Wind whispered through the treetops. Somewhere far below, she could hear the faint rush of water. It was so different from the constant noise of Copper Ridge, the clanging of mining equipment, the shouts of men, the grinding wheels of ore wagons. Here, the world felt clean. Kale emerged a few minutes later, his expression satisfied. "It's clear. No bears, no cats, nothing but some old bat droppings in the back chamber. Come on, I'll get you settled and then tend to the horse." The cave was larger than Soraya had expected. The entrance opened into a main chamber about 15 feet across, with a ceiling high enough that Kale could stand upright. The floor was relatively flat, covered in a layer of fine dust and small stones. Toward the back, she could see two smaller openings leading deeper into the rock. A natural chimney in the ceiling would allow smoke to escape, though the opening was narrow enough to disperse it, so it wouldn't be easily spotted from below. Kale unslung his pack and began pulling out supplies with practiced efficiency. A bedroll, a small cookpot, packets of dried meat and pemmican, a fire kit. He handed Soraya a thick wool blanket. "Wrap yourself in this. The temperature will drop fast once the sun sets. I'm going to gather firewood and take care of the horse. Then I'll make us something hot to eat. You've had a shock and you need rest." "I can help," Soraya protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "You can help by sitting down and not pushing yourself into collapse," Kale said, not unkindly. "I've spent years taking care of myself in places like this." "Let me work." Soraya wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She sank down against the cave wall, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. and watched as Kale moved back and forth, gathering deadfall from the surrounding forest. Unsaddling his horse and hobbling it in a small clearing where grass still grew despite the season. He worked with the unhurried competence of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done and in what order. When he finally returned with an armload of wood, he built the fire with care, arranging kindling and larger pieces in a precise structure. He struck his flint, and sparks cascaded onto a small nest of dry moss. Within minutes, flames were licking upward, and warmth began to fill the cave. Soraya felt some of the tension leave her body as the heat reached her. Kale filled his cookpot with water from a skin bag and set it over the flames. He added dried meat, some wild onions he must have collected while outside, and a handful of what looked like dried berries. The smell that soon filled the cave was simple but deeply comforting. Soraya's stomach growled loudly, and she pressed a hand against it, embarrassed. "When did you last eat?" Kale asked without looking at her. "Yesterday morning," Soraya admitted. "They locked me in the store's back room last night. No one brought food." Kale's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He stirred the pot, tested the broth, then ladled some into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Drink this slowly. Your stomach won't thank you if you gulp it down." Soraya took the cup with both hands, savoring the warmth against her palms. The broth was rich and salty, and she had to force herself to sip rather than drain it in one go. She had never tasted anything so good. When she finished, Kale refilled the cup without comment, and she drank that too. More slowly this time. He prepared his own portion and sat across the fire from her, eating in silence. Soraya studied him in the flickering light. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30. His face was striking rather than handsome, all sharp angles and strong bones. A thin scar ran along his left cheekbone, pale against his darker skin. His hands, when he lifted the cup to his lips, were scarred and calloused. The hands of someone who had worked hard for everything he had. "You said your sister," Soraya began hesitantly. "The one my mother helped. What happened to her?" Kale was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set his cup down and stared into the flames. "Her name was Nahimana. It means mystic in our language. She was 14 when she died, 7 years ago. A group of miners attacked our camp while most of the men were away hunting. They wanted the women, wanted to prove some kind of point about who owned the land." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Soraya could hear the pain underneath. Naimana fought. They killed her for it. Beat her to death and left her in the snow. Soraya felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so sorry. My mother died that same winter. Grief, mostly. She just stopped eating, stopped speaking. My father lasted another year, then rode out into a blizzard and never came back. I was alone after that." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "That's when I learned that the world doesn't care about justice. It doesn't care about what's fair or right. You survive or you don't. You fight or you die. Those are the only choices, but you helped me," Soraya said softly. "You didn't have to. You could have ridden past, stayed safe. I told myself I would never stand by and watch again," Kale said. "After Nehemana died, after I buried what was left of my family, I made a promise. If I ever saw someone being hurt the way they were hurt, I would act, even if it cost me everything." He picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Maybe it's stupid. Maybe it'll get me killed someday. But it's the only way I can live with myself." Soraya pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "My mother used to say something similar. She said that we're all connected like threads in a blanket. When one thread breaks, the whole thing gets weaker. She believed in helping people, even when they didn't help her back. Your mother was a good woman," Kale said. "I only met her twice, but I could see it in her. She had a light about her, something that made people feel safe." He glanced at Soraya. "You have it too, you know. I saw it in town." The way that schoolteacher's daughter tried to step forward. The way Winter Dove looked at you. You matter to people, even if Mercer and his kind refused to see it. Soraya didn't know what to say to that. For so long, she had felt invisible in Copper Ridge. Tolerated at best, despised at worst.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The idea that anyone saw value in her seemed impossible. What happens now? She asked instead. Mercer won't let this go. He'll send men after us. He will, Cale agreed. But he'll have to find us first, and these mountains are vast. I know places where 100 men could search for a month and never find a trace. We'll stay here tonight, let you rest and heal. Tomorrow we head higher into the back country where miners and townfolk don't go. There's a valley about 3 days' ride north where my people used to camp before the treaties pushed us onto reservations. It's remote, beautiful, and there's game and water. We can winter there if we need to. Winter? Soraya repeated, the word heavy with implication. Cale met her gaze steadily. You can't go back to Copper Ridge. You know that, don't you? If Mercer gets his hands on you again, he'll make sure you don't survive. And he'll make it look legal, make it look justified. That's how men like him work. Soraya knew he was right. The truth of it sat in her stomach like a stone. Everything she had known, the boarding house where she had scrubbed floors, the little room she had rented from Mrs. Chun, the few possessions she had accumulated, all of it was gone. She was adrift now, dependent on the kindness of a stranger who owed her nothing. I don't want to be a burden, she said quietly. You're not a burden, Cale said firmly. You're a person in need of help. There's a difference. I have food, I have shelter knowledge, I have skills. What I don't have is company. The solitary life is peaceful, but it gets lonely. Maybe we can help each other. Something in his tone made Soraya look up. There was no expectation in his eyes, no hunger, just simple honesty. He wasn't asking for anything she wasn't willing to give. He was offering partnership, not ownership. The distinction mattered more than she could express. I can sew, Soraya offered. I can cook, though I'm better with a stew pot than anything fancy. I know which plants are safe to eat and which ones will make you sick. My mother taught me before she died. And I'm strong. I can work, then we'll figure it out together, Cale said. He stood and walked to his pack, pulling out a small leather pouch. He brought it back and handed it to her. This is arnica and comfrey ground into a paste. It'll help with the bruising on your shoulders and back. Do you want me to apply it, or would you rather do it yourself? Soraya took the pouch, grateful for his tact. I can manage, thank you. I'll step outside then, give you privacy. Call if you need anything. Cale moved toward the cave entrance, pausing to add another log to the fire. Then he disappeared into the gathering darkness. Alone, Soraya carefully removed her torn dress, wincing as the fabric pulled away from a braided skin. Her back and shoulders were a mess of bruises, purple and black and deep red. She applied the paste as best she could, reaching the spots she could access and leaving the rest. The herbal mixture was cool and soothing, and she felt immediate relief. She dressed again, pulling the blanket back around herself, and called out to Cale. He returned a few minutes later, carrying more wood. How are you feeling? Better, Soraya said, and it was mostly true. The food and warmth had done much to restore her, and knowing she was safe, at least for tonight, allowed some of the fear to drain away. Cale, I need to ask you something. He settled back down across from her, waiting. Why Lone Walker? Winter Dove called you that once. I heard her say it to another woman at the trading post. She said you were a good man but walked alone by choice. Why? Cale studied the fire for a long moment. After my family died, I tried living with my uncle's band. But everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts. I saw Nehemana in every young girl's face. I saw my mother in the way the elder women moved. I couldn't heal there, couldn't breathe. So I left. I learned to track, to hunt, to survive alone. I built a life that didn't require anyone else. It was easier that way. No attachments meant no loss. That sounds lonely, Soraya said. It is, Cale admitted. But loneliness is safer than grief. Or at least, that's what I told myself. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding born of shared pain. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe loneliness is just another kind of grief, stretched out over years instead of happening all at once. Soraya felt her throat tighten. She knew exactly what he meant. After her father died, she had closed herself off too, expecting nothing from the people of Copper Ridge, because expecting nothing meant she couldn't be disappointed. But it also meant she had lived half a life, going through motions without ever really connecting. My father used to say that surviving isn't the same as living, she said softly. I never understood what he meant until after he was gone. Then I realized I was just surviving, day after day, never really alive. Maybe we can change that, Cale said. Both of us. Maybe this is a chance to start over, to build something better than what we left behind. The fire crackled between them, and outside the cave, night had fully fallen. The temperature had dropped sharply, and Soraya was grateful for the blanket and the warmth of the flames. She felt exhaustion pulling at her, her body finally ready to surrender to sleep now that she felt safe. Cale noticed her eyelids drooping. You should rest. I'll keep watch tonight, make sure we're not followed. Tomorrow will be a hard day of travel, and you'll need your strength. You need to sleep too. Soraya protested weakly. I will later. I'm used to keeping irregular hours. It comes with the hunting life. He unrolled his bedroll and laid it out on the opposite side of the fire from where Soraya sat. Here, take this. It's more comfortable than sleeping against stone. What about you? I've slept on worse than cave floors, believe me. Take it. Too tired to argue, Soraya crawled onto the bedroll and pulled the blanket over herself. The warmth from the fire washed over her, and she felt her muscles begin to relax for the first time since yesterday. Cale added another log to the fire, then settled himself with his back against the cave wall, his rifle across his knees. He looked alert and calm, ready for whatever the night might bring. Cale? Soraya murmured, already half asleep. Yes? Thank you. For everything. I know I said it before, but I mean it. You saved my life today. You're welcome, Cale said quietly. Sleep now. Tomorrow we start the real journey. Soraya's eyes closed, and within moments, she was asleep. Her breathing deepened, became regular, and some of the tension left her face. Cale watched her for a moment. This woman who had been so close to death just hours ago, now sleeping peacefully in his bedroll. He felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Not attraction exactly, though she was beautiful in her own way. Something deeper. Recognition maybe. The sense that he had found someone who understood what it meant to live between worlds, to be neither one thing nor another. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. Cale listened to the sounds of the forest, his senses attuned to any change, any threat. But the night remained quiet, and gradually he allowed himself to believe that they had made it, at least for now. Mercer's men would come, probably by dawn. But they would find only cold ashes and tracks leading in 3 different directions. By the time they sorted it out, he and Soraya would be deep in the high country, beyond reach. As the fire burned down to embers and the cave grew darker, Cale finally allowed his own eyes to close. But he didn't sleep deeply. Part of him remained alert, listening, watching, ready. He had made a promise today, both to Soraya and to himself. He would keep her safe, no matter what it cost. Because in saving her, maybe he could finally start to save himself. The mountains kept their secrets, and the night passed slowly, marked only by the dying of the fire and the slow wheel of stars overhead. Dawn broke cold and clear, the sky bleeding from deep purple to pale gold as Saria opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory returned in a rush, the town square, the ropes, Kale cutting her free. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and aching. The fire had died to ash during the night, and the cave was frigid. Kale was gone. Panic flared briefly until she heard movement outside. A moment later, he appeared at the cave entrance, his arms full of pine boughs and his breath misting in the cold air. "You're awake," he said, setting down his load. "Good, we need to move soon. I found tracks about half a mile down the trail. 4 horses, maybe 5. They're searching in a grid pattern, working their way up the mountain." Saria stood, ignoring the protest from her bruised shoulders. "How long do we have?" 2 hours, maybe 3 if they stop to rest the horses. But we can't count on that. Kale knelt and quickly rebuilt the fire, coaxing flames from the embers with practiced efficiency. He set water to boil and pulled out strips of dried venison and some hard biscuits. "Eat fast. We'll take the rest with us. I'm going to cover our tracks here and lay a false trail leading east. That should buy us time." They ate in tense silence, the food tasteless in Saria's mouth despite her hunger. She could feel time pressing down on them like a physical weight. When they finished, Kale packed with swift precision, leaving nothing behind that would indicate they had been there. He scattered the ashes of the fire, swept the cave floor with pine boughs to obscure their footprints, and even took care to rearrange the grapevines at the entrance. Outside, he worked even more carefully, creating a false trail by dragging a branch behind the horse to suggest they had headed east toward the lower valleys. Then he doubled back, walking backward in his own footprints before finally leading the horse northwest, stepping only on bare stone where possible. Saria watched in fascination, realizing just how skilled he truly was. "My grandfather taught me," Kale said, catching her expression. "He could walk through snow and leave barely a trace. He said the land speaks to those who know how to listen. And if you move with respect, it will help hide you from your enemies." They mounted and began climbing again, the terrain growing steeper and more rugged. The paint horse struggled in places, its hooves slipping on loose scree, but it never balked. Kale guided it with quiet words and gentle pressure, taking his time, never rushing. Behind them, the forest swallowed their passage, and by mid-morning, they had gained significant altitude. The landscape changed as they climbed. The dense pine forests gave way to more open terrain, studded with weathered granite boulders and hardy shrubs that clung to life in thin soil. The air grew thinner, colder, and Saria found herself breathing harder. Her ribs ached with each inhalation, but she refused to complain. Kale had saved her life. The least she could do was keep pace around noon. They stopped to rest the horse and drink from a spring that bubbled up between 2 massive rocks. The water was so cold it hurt Saria's teeth, but it was clean and sweet. Kale scanned the horizon constantly, his eyes never still, always searching for movement or the glint of metal that might betray pursuers. "Tell me about your father," he said suddenly, still watching the trail below. "How did he end up in Montana?" Saria wrapped her arms around herself, grateful for the distraction from her fear. "He came from Scotland, from a place called the Highlands. He used to tell me stories about green mountains and cold mists. He said he left because there was nothing there for a younger son, no land, no future. He wanted adventure, wanted to see the world. He ended up in Montreal first, working as a voyageur for the fur companies. That's where he met my mother. How did they meet? Her band was trading at Fort William. My father said he saw her across the trading post and knew immediately that she was the one. He was 22, she was 19. He learned Blackfoot to court her properly, learned the customs, the protocols. Her father finally agreed to the marriage after my father proved himself on a winter trapline. Survived 3 months alone in conditions that killed men twice his size. Soraya smiled at the memory of her father telling this story, his eyes bright with love even years later. They were happy together. Really happy. Even when times were hard, even when people looked at them sideways, they had each other. That's rare, Cale said quietly. That kind of love. Most marriages I've seen are transactions, arrangements. Not partnerships. What about you? Soraya asked. Was there ever anyone? Cale was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, once, her name was Talasi. It means beautiful water. We grew up together, planned to marry after I completed my first solo hunt. But that was the winter the miners came, the winter everything fell apart. She married someone else after my family died, someone who could provide stability, safety. I don't blame her. I had nothing to offer, just grief and anger. He paused. I heard she has 3 children now, lives on the reservation near the Marias River. I hope she's happy. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a deep, quiet sadness. Soraya understood it perfectly. Sometimes life simply took things from you, and there was no one to blame, no way to fight back. You just had to survive the loss and keep moving. They rode on, the afternoon sun warm on their backs despite the cold air. The trail narrowed to barely more than a ledge in places, with steep drops on one side and sheer rock face on the other. Soraya tried not to look down, focusing instead on the horse's neck and Cale's steady presence. His confidence was reassuring. He moved through this dangerous terrain as easily as most people walk down a town street. Late in the afternoon, they reached a high meadow that stretched for nearly a mile, ringed by towering peaks. Wildflowers had long since died back, but the grass was still thick, though brown with autumn. A small lake reflected the sky like polished silver, and everywhere Soraya looked, she saw signs of abundant wildlife. Elk droppings, deer tracks, the distinctive pad marks of a mountain lion. This is one of my favorite places, Cale said, dismounting. I come here every fall to hunt elk. The herds migrate through, heading to lower elevations before the snow gets too deep. We'll camp here tonight. It's defensible. There's only 2 ways in. And I can watch both from that ridge. He pointed to a rock outcropping that commanded a view of the entire meadow. They made camp near the lake, sheltered by a cluster of wind-twisted pines. Cale wouldn't allow a fire, too visible, so they ate cold rations and wrapped themselves in blankets as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. The sky turned spectacular, bands of orange and pink and deep purple stretching from horizon to horizon. Soraya had never seen anything so beautiful. My mother used to say that sunsets are the Creator's way of reminding us that even endings can be beautiful, Cale said softly. He was sitting a few feet away, his rifle across his knees, watching the light show. I never really understood what she meant until after she was gone. Then I realized she was talking about death, about how even terrible things have their own kind of beauty if you know how to look at them. That's a hard wisdom, Soraya said. It is. But it's kept me alive. When everything else was taken from me, I still had the land, the sky, the changing seasons. They kept going regardless of my pain, and eventually, I learned to keep going too. He glanced at her. You'll learn it too. It takes time, but you will. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. That's not weakness. That's honesty. Fear is what keeps you alive in situations like this. It makes you careful, makes you think before you act. The people who die in the wilderness are usually the ones who aren't afraid enough. Cale shifted, adjusting the rifle. But you're still here. You survived Copper Ridge, survived being tied between horses, survived a day of hard travel through mountains you've never seen before. That takes strength, whether you recognize it or not. Soraya pulled the blanket tighter, considering his words. Maybe he was right. She had survived things she never thought she would. Her mother's death when she was just a child, her father's death 5 years ago. 5 years of loneliness and casual cruelty in Copper Ridge. And now this. Being hunted like an animal through mountain wilderness. Yet here she sat, alive, breathing, still capable of appreciating a sunset. Maybe that was its own kind of victory. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. Soraya could see her breath misting in the starlight. Cale had positioned himself where he could watch both approaches to the meadow, and she could tell he wouldn't sleep tonight. He would keep vigil, protecting her while she rested. The knowledge was both comforting and guilt-inducing. "Cale," she said quietly, "you need to sleep. You can't go on like this indefinitely. I'll sleep when we reach the Winter Valley. That's still 2 days away, and the most dangerous part of the journey. Once we're there, we'll be safe enough that I can rest." His voice was firm, allowing no argument. "Right now your safety is more important than my comfort." Soraya wanted to protest, but she was too tired. The day's travel had drained her more than she wanted to admit. She lay down on the bedroll Cale had insisted she use, staring up at the stars. They were brighter here than she had ever seen them, the Milky Way a river of light stretching across the heavens. She tried to pick out constellations her father had taught her. Orion the Hunter, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia in her chair. Sleep took her gradually, pulling her down into darkness. Her last conscious thought was of Cale, sitting watch in the cold, protecting someone he barely knew because it was the right thing to do. She had never known anyone like him, never been around someone who acted without expectation of reward or recognition. It was humbling and inspiring in equal measure. She dreamed of her mother, a woman she barely remembered except in fragments and stories. In the dream, Ayana was teaching her to identify healing plants in a mountain meadow, much like the one where they now camped. Her mother's voice was soft, patient, as she explained which roots could ease pain, which leaves could reduce fever. "The land provides everything we need," Dream Ayana said, "but only if we approach it with respect and gratitude. Take too much, and it will turn away. Take only what you need, and it will sustain you forever." Soraya woke several times during the night, each time finding Cale in exactly the same position, silhouetted against the stars, utterly still except for the slow turn of his head as he scanned the darkness. Once, she heard him stand and move to the edge of their camp, and she tensed until she heard him return, his footsteps deliberate so she would know it was him. "Just checking the perimeter," he said softly. "Go back to sleep." The last time she woke, false dawn was lightening the eastern sky, turning it from black to deep blue. Cale was preparing to break camp, moving with quiet efficiency. When he saw her eyes open, he brought her water and some pemmican. "Eat while we walk. I want to be off this meadow before full light. Open ground makes me nervous when I know we're being hunted." They were mounted and moving within 20 minutes, following a trail that led north along the lake's edge before climbing again into rocky terrain. The going was slower here, the path treacherous with loose stones and hidden crevices. Several times, Cale had to dismount and lead the horse carefully around obstacles. Mid-morning brought their first real crisis. They were traversing a narrow section of trail, barely wide enough for the horse, when Soraya heard something that made her blood freeze. Voices, distant but unmistakable, echoing up from the valley below. Cale heard them too. His hand shot up in a signal for silence, and he quickly guided the horse behind a large boulder, out of sight from below. They waited, hardly breathing, as the voices grew louder. Soraya could make out words now. "Trail goes cold here. Could have gone any direction. Mercer's gonna be livid if we come back empty-handed. Maybe they headed back down. Tried to circle around to one of the other settlements. Or maybe that Indian knows tricks we haven't thought of. They're like smoke, these people. Here 1 minute, gone the next." The voices were close now, terrifyingly close. Soraya could hear the creak of saddle leather, the snort of tired horses. Her heart hammered so hard she was certain they would hear it. Kale's hand rested on his rifle, his face expressionless but his body coiled tight, ready to fight if necessary. Then one of the men said, "Wait, look at this. Tracks heading east, see? Branches dragged through here recently. They went this way, toward the lower passes. You sure?" "Sure as I can be. Come on, if we push hard, we might catch them by nightfall." The voices faded as the search party moved away, following the false trail Kale had laid yesterday. Soraya let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, her whole body shaking with released tension. Kale remained motionless for several more minutes, listening intently. Only when he was satisfied did he relax slightly. "That was close," Soraya whispered. "Too close. They're better trackers than I expected, or they have someone with them who knows what to look for. We need to move faster, take more risks. The Winter Valley is still a day and a half away, and we can't afford another encounter like that." Kale urged the horse forward, back onto the trail. "Stay alert. Watch for any movement, any sound that doesn't belong. If I tell you to get down or hide, you do it instantly, no questions. Understood?" "Understood," Soraya said, her voice steadier than she felt. They pushed hard for the rest of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and grab mouthfuls of food. The terrain grew increasingly wild and beautiful, vast vistas of mountain and forest stretching in every direction. But Soraya couldn't appreciate it, not with fear riding her shoulders like a physical weight. Every bird call made her flinch. Every snapping branch sent adrenaline coursing through her veins. By late afternoon, they had climbed into genuine wilderness, places where probably no human had set foot in months or even years. The trail vanished entirely at times, forcing Kale to navigate by landmarks and instinct. But he never hesitated, never second-guessed himself. He knew where he was going with absolute certainty. As the sun began its descent, Kale finally allowed them to stop at a tiny sheltered hollow, barely big enough for the horse and the two of them. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said. "But we'll travel part of tonight by moonlight. It's risky, but staying ahead of them is more important. The moon's nearly full, should be enough light to see by once it rises." They huddled together against the cold, sharing body heat without awkwardness. Soraya was too exhausted to feel self-conscious, and Kale was utterly professional in his proximity. He simply positioned himself to block the wind, offering his warmth as he would offer water or food. "A practical necessity for survival. Tomorrow," he said quietly. His breath warm against her hair. "We'll reach the valley. There's a shelter there, a cabin I built 3 years ago. It's small but solid, with a good roof and a stone fireplace. We'll have real walls around us, real protection. You'll be able to rest properly, heal properly. Just one more day, Soraya. Can you make it one more day?" "I can make it," she said, and meant it. She had come this far. She would not give up now, not when safety was finally within reach. "Thank you, Kale, for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it every time. I know you do," he said. "Now rest. We ride again in 3 hours." Soraya closed her eyes, listening to the wind and the distant call of a wolf. Tomorrow they would reach sanctuary. Tomorrow the running would finally end. She just had to survive one more night, one more day. She could do that. She had to. The mountains stood eternal around them, indifferent to human drama, offering neither comfort nor cruelty, just the brutal, beautiful reality of survival in a world that cared nothing for the weak. They rode through the night under a moon so bright it cast shadows. The landscape transformed into something otherworldly, silver and black and utterly silent except for the horse's careful footfalls. Soraya had never experienced anything like it. The darkness was alive around them, full of sounds she couldn't identify, rustlings and distant calls that made her skin prickle with primal awareness. But Kale moved through it as if it were midday, his confidence absolute. Dawn found them descending into a narrow canyon, its walls rising steep and dark on either side. A creek ran along the bottom, its water so clear Soraya could see smooth stones glowing amber and gray beneath the surface. Kale finally allowed them to stop, and they both drank deeply, splashing cold water on their faces to wash away the grit and exhaustion of the night's travel. "The valley is just beyond that ridge," Kale said, pointing to a line of rock that blocked their view to the north. "Another 3 hours, maybe 4. The hardest part is behind us now. This canyon opens into a series of meadows, and then the valley itself. Very few people know it exists. The entrance is hidden, looks like a dead end unless you know where to look." They pressed on, both of them running on reserves they hadn't known they possessed. The horse was flagging too, its head hanging lower, its steps less certain. "Not much farther, old friend," Kale murmured to the animal, running his hand along its neck. "Just a little more, then you can rest for as long as you need." The canyon widened gradually, its walls lowering until they were riding through a landscape of rolling hills covered in golden grass.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Stands of aspen blazed yellow and orange, their leaves trembling in the breeze. It was stunningly beautiful, and despite her exhaustion, Soraya felt her spirits lift. This was what freedom looked like, vast and wild and untamed. Then Kale stiffened in the saddle. His hand went to his rifle, and Soraya felt her heart drop. "What is it?" She whispered. "Smoke," he said, his voice tight. "Coming from the direction of the valley. Someone's there." Soraya strained her eyes and finally saw it, a thin column of gray rising above the ridge. "Could it be someone from your people?" "No, my people avoid this place now. The treaties made it forbidden territory, technically owned by the government, even though no white man has ever settled it. The only ones who would be here are either lost, which is unlikely, or hunting us." Kale's jaw worked as he thought. "We have to assume the worst. Somehow they got ahead of us, or there's a second group. Mercer must have split his forces, sent some on the direct route while others followed our trail. What do we do?" Kale dismounted and helped Soraya down. "We go on foot from here. The horse is too visible, makes too much noise. There's a stand of rocks about half a mile from the cabin where we can observe without being seen. We'll leave the horse here, hidden in that grove of aspen. If things go wrong, you come back here and ride for the nearest settlement. It's called Redstone Creek, about 2 days south. Tell them what happened, get help. I'm not leaving you," Soraya said firmly. "You will if I tell you to. I didn't bring you this far to watch you get captured or killed because of stubbornness." Kale's eyes were hard. "Promise me, Soraya. If I say run, you run. Don't look back, don't hesitate. Just survive. That's all that matters." Soraya wanted to argue, but she saw the fear behind his determination. Not fear for himself, but for her. Finally, she nodded. "I promise." They secured the horse in the aspen grove, leaving it with access to grass and water. Kale took only his rifle, his knife, and a small pack with emergency supplies. Then they began the careful approach toward the valley, moving from cover to cover, using every bit of concealment the landscape offered. It took them nearly an hour to reach the rocks Kale had mentioned. They were a tumbled pile of granite boulders, still warm from yesterday's sun, that offered a perfect vantage point. Soraya crouched beside Kale as he peered over the top. Studying the scene below, the valley was everything he had promised. A hidden gem of meadowland surrounded by protective peaks. A creek winding through its center like a silver ribbon. And there, near the creek, stood a small cabin, smoke rising from its chimney. Outside, 3 horses were tied to a makeshift hitching rail. 3 men sat around a fire, clearly visible even at this distance. Kale swore softly in Blackfoot, A string of words Soraya didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. "That's my cabin. They're in my home." His hands were white-knuckled on the rifle. "I recognize two of them. Ben Cartwright and his brother Luke. They work for Mercer. The third I don't know, but he's dressed like a hired gun. Professional. How did they find it? Someone talked, or someone tracked better than I thought possible. Doesn't matter now. What matters is they're between us and shelter, and they're clearly waiting for us to show up." Cale lowered himself back behind the rocks, thinking hard. They'll have posted a watch, probably taking shifts. The smart move would be for one to be inside, two outside, rotating every few hours to stay alert. Can we go around them? Find another place? Not easily. Winter is coming fast at this elevation. You can smell it in the air. Without real shelter, without supplies, we won't last a week. That cabin has everything we need. Food I cached last spring, warm clothes, tools, ammunition. We have to get them out of there. Cale met her eyes. I need to think. We're not going to rush this. Mistakes now will get us both killed. They settled in to observe, watching the patterns of the men below. Cale had been right about the shifts. One man stayed inside while two remained outside, then they rotated. They weren't careless, weren't drinking or sleeping on watch. These were serious men doing serious work. The one in the black coat, Cale said after an hour of observation. That's the professional. Watch how he moves. Never relaxes, always aware of his surroundings. He's the most dangerous. We have to take him out first, or he'll kill us both. How? Soraya asked. She had never been involved in anything like this, had never even considered violence as a solution. But survival changed people, changed what they were willing to consider. I have an idea, but it's risky. We wait until dark, then I circle around and approach from the north through the creek bed. The water will hide my scent and muffle sound. I get close enough to the cabin, create a distraction, draw them out. When they come to investigate, you signal me from here by reflecting moonlight with this. He handed her a small piece of polished metal. Flash it 3 times when they're all outside, looking away from the cabin. That's when I move in. That puts you in terrible danger. Everything about this situation is dangerous. At least this way, we control some of the variables. And Soraya, if it goes wrong, if they catch me, you run. You don't try to help, you don't try to save me. You get on that horse and you ride until you're safe. Understood? She didn't answer, couldn't promise something she knew she might not keep. Instead, she asked, what kind of distraction? Fire. I'll set fire to the brush upwind of the cabin. In this dry season, it'll spread fast, create smoke and confusion. They'll have to respond, can't risk the cabin burning. That's when I slip in the back, grab what we need most, food, blankets, my winter gear, and disappear before they realize what's happening. It was a desperate plan, full of things that could go wrong. But Soraya couldn't think of anything better. And clearly, neither could Cale. They spent the rest of the day watching, noting every detail, memorizing the positions of the men, the layout of the land, every factor that might matter when darkness came. The professional in the black coat worried Soraya most. He reminded her of a wolf she had once seen near Copper Ridge, patient and intelligent, watching a wounded deer with calculation rather than hunger. This man had the same quality, the sense of someone who killed not from passion but from skill. As the sun set, Cale prepared. He stripped off anything that might make noise, left his rifle with Soraya since he would need both hands free, took only his knife. The 3 flashes, he reminded her. Don't do it too soon, don't do it too late. Timing is everything. Be careful, Soraya whispered, knowing how inadequate the words were. Always am, Cale said, and then he was gone, melting into the gathering darkness like smoke. Soraya watched him disappear, then turned her attention back to the cabin. The men had built up their fire against the cold, and she could see them clearly in its light. They were talking, their voices too distant to make out words, but their body language suggested boredom and frustration. They had been here for at least a day, maybe longer, waiting for quarry that hadn't appeared. That worked in Kale's favor. Bored men made mistakes, let their attention wander, time crawled. Every minute felt like an hour as Soraya waited, the piece of polished metal clutched in her hand. The moon rose, huge and bright, painting everything in shades of silver. She kept losing sight of Kale, then catching glimpses of movement that might have been him or might have been shadows. Her nerves stretched tighter and tighter. Then she smelled it, smoke, but not from the cabin's chimney. This was the sharp, acrid smell of burning sagebrush. The men noticed it too. They stood abruptly, looking around, trying to locate the source. "Fire!" one of them shouted. North side, in the brush. They moved fast, all three of them, grabbing tools and blankets to fight the flames. Soraya watched as they ran toward the fire, which was spreading exactly as Kale had predicted, jumping from bush to bush, driven by the night breeze. For a moment, they all had their backs to the cabin. Soraya raised the metal and caught the moonlight, angling it toward where she thought Kale would be watching. Flash, flash, then she lowered it. Her heart pounding so hard she felt sick. She never saw Kale enter the cabin. One moment, the door was closed. The next, it was open just a crack. He was inside, moving with impossible speed and silence. The men were fully occupied with the fire now, shouting instructions to each other, beating at flames with blankets. The fire was bigger than Soraya had expected, spreading fast, and she felt a flutter of concern. What if it got out of control? What if it trapped them all? Then Kale was out, a pack on his back, another bundle under his arm. He moved along the cabin's back wall, staying low, and disappeared into the darkness beyond. Soraya wanted to cheer, wanted to weep with relief. He had done it, had gotten what they needed, but the professional hadn't gone to fight the fire. Soraya's blood turned to ice as she realized he had circled around, was now moving toward the cabin from a different angle. He had suspected a trick, had positioned himself to catch anyone trying exactly what Kale had just done. She watched in horror as he raised his rifle, sighting along the barrel toward where Kale had vanished. Without thinking, Soraya stood and screamed. "Kale, behind you!" The man in the black coat spun toward her voice. And that moment of distraction was enough. Kale dove behind a rock outcropping as the rifle cracked, the bullet striking stone and whining off into the night. The other two men came running, and suddenly the situation exploded into chaos. "Get them!" the professional shouted. "The woman's in those rocks to the south. The Indians heading for the creek. Split up, don't let them escape." Soraya ran, abandoning the shelter of the rocks, racing back toward where they had left the horse. She could hear pursuit behind her, crashing through brush, men shouting. A gunshot split the air, and she had no idea if it was aimed at her or at Kale. Terror gave her speed she didn't know she possessed. She reached the aspen grove, gasping for air, and fumbled with the horse's tether. Her hands shook so badly she could barely manage the knot. Another gunshot, closer this time. "I see her," someone yelled. "In the trees, get her." Then Kale was there, appearing from nowhere, his face bleeding from a cut above his eye. He sliced through the tether with one stroke of his knife and literally threw Soraya onto the horse before vaulting up behind her. "Hold on," he shouted, and kicked the horse into a dead run. They crashed through the aspen grove with no thought for stealth or care. Branches whipping at their faces, the horse's hooves thundering on soft earth. Behind them, more gunshots, the muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Soraya hunched low over the horse's neck, Kale's arms bracketing her, his body shielding her as much as possible. The horse burst from the trees into open ground, and Kale turned it south, away from the valley, back the way they had come. It was the opposite of what they needed, but there was no choice. They couldn't outrun bullets, could only hope to get beyond accurate range before the men got organized. They rode hard for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. The horse's breath coming in great heaving gasps, foam flecking its neck. Finally Cale slowed, not because they were safe, but because the horse simply couldn't maintain the pace. "Easy, easy," he murmured to the animal. "I know you're tired. Just a little more. Are they following?" Soraya asked, her voice shaking. "Yes, I can hear them. But they're on foot. We lost their horses when I cut them loose before leaving the valley. It'll take them time to catch the animals, and that gives us a lead. But we've lost everything, Soraya. All the supplies I grabbed. I dropped them when I had to dive for cover. We have nothing but what's on our backs and in my belt." The reality of their situation crashed over Soraya like cold water. They were back to nothing, exhausted, hunted, with no shelter and no supplies, heading into mountain wilderness as winter approached. "What do we do?" "We survive," Cale said grimly. "We've made it this far. We'll find a way. There's another place I know, farther south, not as good as the valley, but it'll work. An old trapper's line shack, abandoned for years. If it's still standing, we can hole up there, regroup, figure out our next move. How far? Day and a half, maybe 2. And we'll have to go carefully. They know our general direction now, and they know we're desperate. That makes us dangerous, but it also makes us predictable. We need to think like they think, anticipate their moves." Cale's arm tightened around her waist, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "I'm sorry, Soraya. I thought the valley would be safe. I was wrong, and that mistake almost got us both killed. You saved us," Soraya said. "You got us out when it went bad. That's what matters. We're alive, we're together, and we're not giving up." In the moonlight, she felt rather than saw Cale smile. "No," he agreed. "We're definitely not giving up. They've pushed us hard, but they haven't broken us. And when this is over, when we finally get somewhere safe, Clayton Mercer and his hired killers are going to learn what it costs to hunt people who refuse to be prey." They rode on through the silver night. 2 fugitives against the world, battered but unbroken, heading toward an uncertain future with nothing but determination and each other to sustain them. The line shack appeared through morning mist like a ghost from another era. Its weathered logs gray with age, roof sagging but miraculously still intact. Cale approached cautiously, rifle ready despite his exhaustion, checking for signs of recent occupation. But there were none, only the tracks of small animals and the accumulated debris of seasons. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, and when he pushed it open, dust motes swirled in the pale light filtering through gaps in the walls. "It's not much," he said, helping Soraya dismount. She swayed on her feet, and he caught her elbow. "But it's shelter, and right now that's everything, inside." The shack was a single room, maybe 12 feet square, with a stone fireplace that had partially collapsed, a rough wooden platform that might once have been a bed, and little else. Mice had nested in the corners, and something larger had clawed at the floorboards near the door. But it was out of the wind, out of sight, and most importantly, it was empty of threats. They had been traveling for nearly 40 hours with almost no rest, pushing themselves and the horse beyond reasonable limits. Cale's hands shook as he unsaddled the animal and led it to a small creek he remembered nearby. Soraya sank onto the wooden platform, too tired even to feel disappointed by their circumstances. Her wrists throbbed where the ropes had cut them days ago, her shoulders ached, and every muscle in her body screamed protest. Cale returned and immediately set about making the space more livable. He cleared the worst of the debris, checked the fireplace and determined it would draw adequately despite the damage, and gathered dry wood from fallen trees nearby. Within an hour, a small fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth pushing back the autumn chill. "We need food," he said, checking his remaining supplies. I have enough pemmican for maybe 2 days if we're careful. After that, I'll have to hunt, and that means staying in one place long enough to process the meat. It's a risk, but we don't have a choice. Soraya watched him move, noting the careful way he favored his left side. "You're hurt," she said. "Bruised ribs from when I dove behind that rock." "Nothing broken, I don't think. Just sore." Cale sat down heavily, his exhaustion finally showing. "We need to talk about what comes next. We can't keep running indefinitely. Eventually, we'll make a mistake, or they'll get lucky, or winter will kill us, even if they don't. We need a real plan, not just reaction and survival." "What kind of plan?" Cale stared into the fire, his expression troubled. "The only way this ends is if Mercer stops hunting us. That means either he dies, we die, or something changes the situation entirely. I'm not willing to accept the second option, and I'm not a murderer, so the first option is complicated. That leaves changing the situation. How do we do that? We need leverage. Information, proof, something that makes hunting us more costly than letting us go. And I think I know what that might be." Cale looked at her directly. "Tell me everything you know about Mercer's mining operation. Everything you've heard, seen, or suspected during your time in Copper Ridge. Don't filter it. Don't worry about whether it's important. Just tell me." Soraya thought back over 5 years of living in that town, paying attention to things most people ignored. "He ships ore irregularly," she began slowly. "Every 3 or 4 weeks, wagons leave at night. I always thought it was strange, shipping after dark. And the amounts, the company ledgers never matched what actually left town. I know because I cleaned the assayer's office, saw his private notes. He was recording one weight to the company, but listing a different, lower weight in the official books." Cale leaned forward, interested. "He's skimming from his own company?" "More than skimming. I think he's operating a completely separate vein that's not on the official claim. There's an old shaft on the north side of the mountain that's supposed to be played out, but I've seen men going in and out of it when they thought no one was watching. And I've seen Mercer meeting with buyers who never went through the company office, men who paid in cash and took ore away in unmarked wagons. That's fraud. Theft from investors and probably tax evasion. If we could prove it, document it, that's leverage. The territorial authorities might not care about a half-native woman being mistreated, but they definitely care about mining fraud. There's too much money involved for them to ignore it." Cale's mind was working now, turning over possibilities. "We need those records. The assayer's notes, shipping manifests, anything that proves the discrepancy between what Mercer reports and what he's actually mining. Those are in Copper Ridge," Soraya said. "We'd have to go back, not we, me. You stay here, stay hidden. I go back alone, move fast, get in and out before anyone knows I'm there." Cale stood and began pacing despite his exhaustion. Winter Dove, she would help. She hates Mercer, has hated him for years, ever since he drove her son off his claim using false debt. She knows people, knows how to move through town without being noticed. If I can get a message to her, she could access those records, or at least tell me exactly where they are and when the office is empty. That's incredibly dangerous. If they catch you, if they catch me, you take the horse and ride for the territorial capital. Find a marshal, a judge, anyone who'll listen. Tell them what you know. It won't be enough to convict Mercer without proof, but it'll start an investigation, and that might be enough to make him back off." Cale stopped pacing and knelt in front of her. "I know it's not a perfect plan. I know there are a dozen ways it could fail. But doing nothing guarantees we die out here when winter comes, or they find us, or we starve. At least this gives us a chance at a real future, not just survival but actual life." Soraya searched his face, seeing determination mixed with something else, something that looked almost like hope. "When would you leave?" "Tomorrow night. I'll travel after dark, moving fast. It's a day's ride if I push hard. I can be in Copper Ridge by dawn the day after, make contact with Winter Dove, get what we need, and be back here within 3 days total. You'll have the rifle, enough food and water. You know how to bar the door, how to stay quiet and hidden. The men hunting us don't know about this place, and they're probably still searching near the valley. It terrified her, the thought of being alone in this remote place while Cale walked back into danger. But she understood the logic, understood that sometimes the only way forward was through risk. 3 days, she said. If you're not back in 3 days, I ride for help. Agreed, Cale said. He reached out and took her hand, the gesture surprising both of them. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. I will come back, Soraya. I promise you that. I didn't save you just to abandon you in a broken-down shack in the middle of nowhere. She squeezed his hand, finding comfort in the solid reality of his presence. I know, I trust you, Cale. That's not something I've been able to say about many people in my life. But I trust you completely. They sat that way for a long moment. Hands clasped, the fire crackling between them. Two people who had been strangers days ago, but who now depended on each other for survival and something more. Something neither of them was quite ready to name. The next day passed in preparation. Cale checked and rechecked his weapons, planned his route, rehearsed what he would say to Winter Dove. Soraya gathered firewood, enough to last her 3 days without having to leave the shack. They shared the remaining pemmican, making each bite count, and talked about everything except the danger Cale was about to walk into. As darkness fell, Cale saddled the horse for the last time before his departure. Soraya stood in the doorway, wrapped in the single blanket they possessed, watching him work. There's something I need to tell you, she said suddenly. He turned, waiting. That day in the square, when you cut me free, I had given up. I thought I was going to die, and part of me had accepted it. I was so tired of fighting, of being hated for something I couldn't change. But then you appeared, and you looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth saving. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. She paused, struggling with words. You gave me back myself. Whatever happens, I need you to know that. You changed everything, Cale. You saved more than just my life. Cale crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into an embrace, fierce and brief. You matter, he said roughly against her hair. Not because of your blood or your name or anything you can do for anyone else. You matter because you're you, because you're strong and brave and kind, despite every reason the world has given you not to be. Don't ever forget that, Soraya. Promise me, I promise, she whispered. He released her and stepped back, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. I'll knock 4 times, pause, then twice more. That's the signal. Anything else, anyone else, you stay hidden and silent. 4 times, pause, twice more. I understand. Cale swung into the saddle, and for a moment, he just looked at her, memorizing her face in the firelight. Then he turned the horse and disappeared into the night, the sound of hoofbeats fading gradually until there was nothing but wind in the trees and the crackle of the fire. Soraya stood in the doorway until she could no longer hear anything, then went inside and barred the door as instructed. The shack felt enormous and empty without Cale's presence. She fed the fire, wrapped herself in the blanket, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. All the ways she might never see him again. The first day alone passed with agonizing slowness. Every sound made her jump, every bird call or snapping branch sending adrenaline coursing through her system. She kept the rifle close, checked and rechecked that it was loaded, though Cale had already shown her 3 times. She rationed the food carefully, eating just enough to keep hunger at bay. The second day was worse. By now, Cale should be approaching Copper Ridge, walking back into the place that wanted them both dead. Soraya found herself praying to her mother's gods and her father's, bargaining with any power that might be listening. Keep him safe, Bring him back to me. Please just let him come back." Night fell on the second day, and she lay on the wooden platform staring at shadows dancing on the ceiling, listening to the fire settle into coals. Tomorrow, if all went well, Cale would begin the journey back. Tomorrow evening or the morning after, she would hear 4 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. She just had to hold on until then. She must have dozed, because she woke suddenly to the sound of horses outside. Multiple horses and voices speaking in low, urgent tones. Her blood turned to ice. Through gaps in the walls, she could see torchlight, could make out at least 3 riders circling the shack. "Someone's been here recently," a voice said. "Fire's still warm, and there's fresh horse droppings near the creek. They can't be far." Another voice, this one familiar and hated. Clayton Mercer himself. "Search the area. Check every tree, every rock formation, every place someone could hide. They're close, I can feel it. And when we find them, the Indian dies quick, but the half-breed. She's going to learn what happens to women who cause me trouble." Soraya pressed herself against the back wall, hardly daring to breathe, the rifle clutched in shaking hands. They were right outside, separated from her by nothing but weathered logs and darkness. If they decided to check the shack, if they saw the fresh wood she'd gathered, if they noticed any of a dozen signs she'd left despite her caution. It was over. One of the men dismounted, and she heard his footsteps approaching the door. Her finger found the trigger, and she prepared herself to fight, to sell her life as dearly as possible if it came to that. The footsteps stopped right outside. A hand tested the door, found it barred. "This one's sealed up tight," the man called. "Probably been closed for years. Want me to break in and check?" A long pause that stretched like torture. Then Mercer's voice, "No, we're wasting time. They're not here, probably miles away by now. We'll search the next valley, check the old logging camps to the south. Move out." The footsteps retreated. The horses moved away, and gradually the torchlight faded. But Soraya didn't move, didn't relax, didn't dare believe she was safe until she could no longer hear anything at all. Only then did she lower the rifle, her entire body shaking with reaction. They had been so close, so terrifyingly close, and only luck or providence or her mother's watchful spirit had kept them from finding her. But they were still searching, still hunting, and now she had new information that Cale needed to know. Mercer wasn't just sending hired men anymore. He was leading the search himself, committed to seeing this through personally. Dawn of the 3rd day came gray and cold. Soraya kept watch through the gaps in the walls, seeing nothing but forest and morning mist. Hours crawled past, each one heavier than the last. Afternoon arrived, then evening, and still no sign of Cale. She tried not to panic. Tried to remember that he had said 3 days, and 3 days wasn't over yet. Not until midnight, then as full darkness fell, she heard it. 4 knocks, deliberate and clear. A pause that seemed to last forever. 2 more knocks. Soraya threw open the bar and yanked the door wide. And there was Cale, dusty and exhausted but alive, a leather satchel slung across his body. He practically fell through the doorway, and she caught him, supporting his weight as she kicked the door closed behind them. "I got it," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "All of it, everything we need. Winter Dove, she's a wonder. She had copies of everything hidden away, waiting for someone brave enough to use them. We have proof, Soraya, real proof that will bring Mercer down." Soraya helped him to the platform and brought him water. He drank deeply, then opened the satchel to show her ledgers, shipping manifests, assayers' reports, all documenting years of systematic fraud. "This is enough," Cale said. "This is enough to destroy him, to make the territorial authorities act. We just have to get it to them, and then we're free. Really free, not just running but actually able to stop, to live, to build something real." She wanted to tell him about Mercer being here, about how close she'd come to discovery, But that could wait. For now, Cale was back, he was safe, and they had what they needed to end this nightmare once and for all. Rest, she said softly. You've earned it. Tomorrow, we plan our next move. But tonight, just rest. Cale nodded. His eyes already closing with exhaustion, the satchel clutched protectively against his chest. And Soraya sat beside him, keeping watch, protecting the man who had risked everything to protect her. The territorial marshal's office in Helena stood like a fortress of law amid the chaos of Montana's fastest-growing city. 3 weeks had passed since Cale and Soraya left the line shack. 3 weeks of careful true backcountry, avoiding main roads and settlements where Mercer's influence reached. They had lived on what Cale could hunt and what wild plants Soraya could identify. Sleeping under stars and in shallow caves, always moving toward this moment. Now they stood in a wood-paneled office that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, facing Marshal Thomas Brennan, a man whose reputation for integrity had survived 2 decades of frontier justice. He sat behind a massive oak desk, the leather satchel open before him, its contents spread across the polished surface. He had been reading for nearly an hour, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is extraordinary," Brennan said finally, looking up at them with sharp blue eyes. "I've suspected Mercer of irregularities for years, but nothing this extensive, this systematic. If these documents are authentic, and I have every reason to believe they are, Clayton Mercer has defrauded his investors of hundreds of thousands of dollars, evaded territorial taxes, and violated at least a dozen mining statutes." He leaned back in his chair, studying them. "The question is, how did you obtain these records? And why should I trust you given that Mercer has posted wanted notices claiming you're fugitives and thieves?" Cale met his gaze steadily. "We obtained them through someone in Copper Ridge who has been documenting Mercer's crimes for years, waiting for someone to act. As for why you should trust us, check the dates on those shipping manifests against the official company records. Send a telegraph to the assayer's office in Butte. Ask them to verify their copies. The evidence speaks for itself, regardless of who brought it to you. And the charges against you?" "False," Soraya said, finding her voice. "I was accused of theft to justify public punishment because of my heritage. Cale intervened to stop that punishment, and we've been hunted ever since. Mercer doesn't want justice, Marshal. He wants silence, wants anyone who threatens his operation eliminated before they can talk." Brennan studied her for a long moment, taking in her worn clothing. The fading bruises still visible on her wrists. The way she held herself with dignity despite obvious exhaustion. "I've heard stories about what happened in Copper Ridge. Different versions, of course. Some say you stole from the company store. Others say you gave food to a hungry child. Some say this man kidnapped you. Others say he saved your life. Truth usually lives somewhere between the stories. The truth is I helped someone who needed help. And Mercer used it as an excuse to make an example of me." Soraya's voice was steady now, stronger than it had been in the line shack. "The truth is Cale Ravencrest risked everything because no one else would. The truth is we've been running for our lives for weeks while Mercer sent hired killers after us. And the truth is in those documents, Marshal. Everything you need to know about what kind of man Clayton Mercer really is." Brennan nodded slowly. "I'm going to verify this information. It'll take a few days, maybe a week. In the meantime, you'll stay in Helena under my protection. I have a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, very discreet, very safe. You'll stay there while I build a case. If everything checks out, and I believe it will, I'll send deputies to Copper Ridge to arrest Mercer and anyone who aided him in his crimes. He won't come quietly," Cale warned. "He has men loyal to him, armed men who have nothing to lose if his operation falls apart. Then they'll learn that territorial law has longer reach than one corrupt mine owner." Brennan stood, extending his hand first to Cale, then to Soraya. "You did a brave thing, bringing this to me. Dangerous, but brave. I'll make sure it wasn't for nothing. The boarding house was everything Brennan had promised, quiet, clean, and run by a woman who asked no questions and offered simple kindness. Mrs. Patterson showed them to separate rooms, brought hot water for washing, and served a meal that was the first real food they had eaten in weeks. Soraya almost wept at the taste of fresh bread and roasted chicken. That night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Soraya found Cale sitting on the back porch of the boarding house, staring up at stars that seemed dimmer here in the city. She sat beside him without speaking, and for a long time, they simply existed together in comfortable silence. "What happens after?" Soraya asked finally. "After Mercer is arrested, after the trial, after everything is finished. What do we do then?" Cale turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that. I can't go back to living alone in the mountains, not after these weeks with you. The solitude that used to bring peace now just feels empty. But I'm also not made for city life, for crowds and noise and walls pressing in. I need space, need to see horizons." "I feel the same," Soraya admitted. "I don't want to go back to Copper Ridge. Don't want to live anywhere I'll always be seen as lesser because of my blood. But I also discovered something these past weeks. I'm stronger than I thought, more capable. I survived things I never imagined surviving, and I did it because I had someone who believed in me, who saw me as a person worth saving." "You saved yourself," Cale said quietly. "I just gave you the opportunity. Everything else, the courage, the determination, the refusal to give up, that was all you." She reached out and took his hand, the gesture natural now after weeks of relying on each other. "I've been thinking too. About that valley you showed me, the one with your cabin. What if we rebuilt it? Made it into something that could last? Not just a hunting shelter, but a real home. We could live there, be free there, build a life that belongs to us and no one else." Cale's fingers tightened around hers. "Together?" "Together," Soraya confirmed. "If you want that. If you want me as a partner, not just someone you rescued, but someone you choose. I know it's complicated. I know people will talk, say things about a Blackfoot man and a half-breed woman. But I don't care anymore what people think. I only care what we think, what we want. I want that more than anything," Cale said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to wake up every morning and see you there. I want to build something with you, something that honors both our peoples, both our histories. I want to teach you everything I know about the land, and learn from you everything you know about healing and growing things. I want a life that's ours, Soraya, not borrowed or stolen, but genuinely ours." She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. And they sat that way as the night deepened around them. Two people who had found each other in the worst circumstances, and discovered something worth fighting for. 5 days later, Marshal Brennan called them back to his office. His expression was grim, but satisfied. "Everything checks out. I've verified the documents with 3 separate sources, and I've secured arrest warrants for Clayton Mercer and 4 of his senior associates. I'm leading a force of 8 deputies to Copper Ridge tomorrow. We'll take them into custody and secure the mining operation until the territorial court can appoint receivers to sort out the financial mess. I want to be there," Cale said immediately. "I want to see him arrested, want him to know that we're the reason his empire fell." Brennan shook his head. "I understand the impulse, but it's not wise. You're witnesses, possibly the most important witnesses in this case. I need you safe, not caught in a potential gunfight if Mercer's men resist. Stay here, stay protected, and when the trial comes, you'll have your moment to face him in court where it matters." Cale wanted to argue, but Soraya squeezed his hand. "He's right. We've come this far by being smart, not reckless. Let the law handle this part. We've done our job." Reluctantly, Cale nodded. "When will you be back?" "A week, maybe less. I'll send a telegraph as soon as Mercer is in custody. Until then, stay at Mrs. Patterson's, stay together, and stay ready. This isn't over until he's behind bars. The waiting was excruciating. Every day felt like a month. Every hour stretched to breaking. Soraya tried to occupy herself with helping Mrs. Patterson with household tasks, while Cale paced like a caged wolf, unable to settle. They took walks through Helena, marveling at how strange it felt to move freely without fear of pursuit, but the anxiety never fully left. 6 days after Brennan departed, a telegraph arrived. Soraya and Cale were summoned to the marshal's office, where they found Brennan looking tired but triumphant. "It's done," he said without preamble. "Mercer is in custody, along with his foreman and 3 others. There was resistance. 2 of his men tried to fight, but we subdued them without serious injuries. The mine has been secured, the record seized, and Mercer is being transported here to Helena to await trial." Soraya felt something inside her release, a tension she had carried for so long it had become part of her. "It's really over? The running is over. The legal proceedings are just beginning, but you're no longer fugitives, no longer hunted. You're free to go wherever you want, live however you want. Though I'll need you both to remain available for the trial. It'll likely happen within 2 months. We'll be here," Cale assured him. "Whatever you need, we'll cooperate fully. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone Mercer hurt, everyone he exploited. We want to see justice done properly." 2 months later, Copper Ridge's town square filled again, but this time for a different kind of spectacle. Word had spread throughout the territory about the trial, and people came from miles around to witness the fall of Clayton Mercer. The proceedings took 3 days, during which Soraya and Cale testified about their ordeal, while prosecutors presented the damning evidence of systematic fraud. Winter Dove testified too, her voice strong despite her age, describing years of witnessing Mercer's corruption. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Soraya watched Mercer's face crumble. The man who had ordered her dragged through streets, who had sent killers after them, who had built his wealth on lies and exploitation, was led away in chains to serve 15 years in territorial prison. It wasn't revenge, exactly, but it was justice. And that was enough. Outside the courthouse, Winter Dove approached them, her weathered face creased in a smile. "Your mother would be proud," she said to Soraya. "And your sister," she added to Cale. "You honored them both with your courage. You showed this territory that people like us matter, that we won't be erased or silenced. That's a powerful thing. We couldn't have done it without you," Soraya said, embracing the old woman. "The documents you saved, the risks you took. You're as much a hero in this as anyone. I'm just an old woman who got tired of watching evil prosper," Winter Dove replied. "But I'm glad I lived long enough to see it end. Now go, both of you. Go build that life you've been dreaming about. You've earned it." Spring came early to the hidden valley, melting snow revealing meadows ready to burst into green. Cale and Soraya stood together on the site where his cabin had been, planning how to rebuild it larger, stronger, with room for the life they intended to create. They had spent the winter months in Helena, working odd jobs and saving money, preparing for this moment. "We'll build it with both our traditions," Cale said, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "Stone hearth like my grandfather built, but a Scottish sleeping loft like your father described. We'll plant a garden here where your mother's herbs can grow. And we'll teach any children we're blessed with the languages and stories of both peoples." Soraya watched him draw, feeling a contentment she had never imagined possible. "Children," she repeated softly. "Do you really think that's possible for us?" "I think anything is possible now," Cale said, setting down the stick and pulling her close. "We survived the impossible, proved ourselves against odds no one should have overcome. If we can do that, we can do anything, including building a family in whatever form that takes. Blood children if we're blessed, adopted children if we're called to that, or just the 2 of us if that's how it works out. Any of it is good, as long as we're together. She kissed him then, deeply and without reservation, pouring into it all the gratitude and hope and love that had been building since the day he cut her free. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, both smiling. "Let's start building," Soraya said. "We have the rest of our lives ahead of us, and I don't want to waste another moment." They worked through the spring and summer, occasionally joined by travelers who had heard their story and wanted to help. Winter Dove visited once, blessing their home in the old ways. Even Marshal Brennan stopped by during a patrol, bringing news that Mercer's mining empire had been broken up and sold. The proceeds going to repay defrauded investors and fund schools for native children in the territory. By the time autumn turned the aspens gold again, the cabin stood complete, larger and stronger than before, smoke rising from its chimney carrying the smell of Soraya's cooking and the promise of warmth within. They had gardens planted, meat smoking in a shed Cale built, and plans for expansion when the time came one evening. As they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the peaks, Soraya leaned against Cale's shoulder and said, "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die in that town square, forgotten and unmourned. And now look at this. Look at what we built, what we survived, what we became. We became free," Cale said simply. "Free to choose, free to love, free to live on our own terms. That's what we fought for, what we risked everything for. And we won, Soraya. Against all odds, we won." The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to their triumph, guardians of the life they had claimed from chaos. And as darkness fell and stars emerged one by one, two people who had been broken by cruelty and redeemed by courage sat together in the home they had built. Finally at peace, finally safe, finally and completely free. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying their story outward into the world. A tale of survival and justice and love that would be told around fires for generations to come. The story of a woman who refused to be destroyed, and the man who helped her remember she was never meant to crawl. The story of how dignity and courage can triumph even in the harshest wilderness, even against the cruelest odds. And somewhere in the vast Montana sky, two spirits watched and smiled. A Blackfoot healer and a Scottish trapper who had loved across boundaries. Their legacy living on in the daughter and the man who carried their wisdom forward into a new and better world.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.